is that this movie is actually an allegory about one of America's great racial secrets and one of the most unusual cultural phenomenons, I would say, in world history. And what is that? It's the concept of African Americans and white passing. Now, this phenomenon is caused by slave culture and how back in the past legally, any African ancestry at all qualified you as a slave, as a descendant of slaves, and put you into perpetual and lifelong servitude. So that a culture developed here in the United States that isn't seen in other places. For example, in apartheid South Africa, they kept people segregated into like colored and black. Whereas in the United States, anybody with African ancestry was considered to be on the same social level and economic level and given the same status. So this legal definition led to all these people that had not only African ancestry, but all other ancestry, particularly Caucasian, would be classified as being in the same group. Now, where this led to problems was over the history of the United States, slave masters continued to father children, so that as time went on, many of the people held in slavery were predominantly of Caucasian ancestry. This is something that's sort of hidden in history and isn't talked about very much. And it led to this phenomenon where people would look so white, basically, that all they had to do was like leave where they were living, run away, and they would be taken as white. There would be no really hint or nobody would know about their past, about their African lineage, about their slave past on these plantations, or about their parents or grandparents and what they were. There were no genetic tests back in those days when this was forming in the 1800s. There were no national registries and computer databases. So if somebody could just run away, and this is one motivation behind the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, if you look into it. Many of these people that they were hunting down, and if you call up articles even from that era, they'd be described as maybe passing for white. This was something that was going on. So the politics here was really about how visually you looked, because there was no other way to identify you. So people could just run away and make this quantum leap from being considered a slave and being black or a Negro to being considered white and having white privilege and being seen as white in society. Now I'm about to spoil the movie Us, that brilliant movie. So if you want to, and what I would like for you to do is stop here and come back and look at this video after you've seen the movie. But for everybody else, I'm going to plunge right into it. Now, the scissors in the movie, it's interesting because they're trying to cut the tie that tethers them to these other people. Now, this was exactly what white passing people had to do who had African American background. They had to cut the ties with their family. They had to tether that. That tether that was there had to be cut. They had to move away and abandon that completely. So, how is this an analogy? Let's look at Adelaide and Red. How is this an analogy to white passing? Because Adelaide looked just like Red. I'll just use those names because obviously it's obscure in a way. But because she looked like Red, she was able to conflate herself with her and take over her life and be raised as her. And she literally went from being this person who had no status or class, who lived underground. But because she looked like Red, she was able to take her place, move into her society, get all the privileges and trappings that she had, and actually live her life, live a life just like her. This is exactly what white passing African Americans did, just by virtue of how they looked. They could move out of one class of people and move into another instantly. And think about Red and Adelaide. She accomplished that all in a day. She didn't have to do anything else. She didn't have to have any training and no other socialization. Just because she looked like her, she was able to move in and take her place. What was the second thing that really shows this allegory and analogy? One of the things that really terrified these people's lives, these white passing African Americans, was the thought of having them be associated with their family. If their family ever came to visit them, say, in the wrong context, and people understood that this was their family, then their cover would be completely blown and they would lose everything they had. And look what happens in the movie. Adelaide is visited by her family, and it's a monstrous thing. It's frightening. It's something she's been fearing her entire life. And these white passing African Americans had that same sense that a visit from their family would literally terrorize them. They would lose everything they had if people understood who their real family was. And this happened over and over again to these people. That the thing that finally got them was when people connected them to their actual families, and they could no longer hide the fact of their lineage and past. What was the third thing that happened here that white passing African Americans had to do? It was cultural assimilation. Think about how Adelaide totally denied her past. And when the other Taylors came up, who did she fight with? Did she join with the other Taylors to fight? No. She started killing them off. She totally associated with the above ground people. She became one of them. And this is sort of the legacy of racism being exposed in this movie that happened with a lot of these white passing people. They could never show sympathy for African Americans and keep their cover. So a lot of them acted very racist and very belligerent towards black people as part of the disguise. So this was really something exposed in the movie, because this was something that would happen. And this is something, to a degree, is the legacy of these white passing black people, is that their descendants, often because of how they acted, tend to be very racist acting people. They have no idea, a lot of them, that they have African ancestry. And there's sort of a legacy of acting racist in their family because that was part of the cover. And the white passing black person has passed this off to their descendants who have no idea that they have African ancestry. Another thing that happened in this movie is very telling and shows this allegory between white passing black people and the Taylors, is when the son Jason has that moment, that epiphany, that realization that his mom is a Taylor. What does he do? He looks at her. And you can see in his eyes that he realizes, but what does he do? He puts the disguise on. He puts the mask on. He stays completely quiet. He doesn't even talk about it. And that is also the legacy of white passing black folks in this country, is that often the family later on or even during the time discovers this is true, but especially children are not going to say a word about it because they don't want to be exposed now. They don't want that kind of sort of stain on them. So they don't talk about it. They just keep it quiet even though they know about it. Sometimes it becomes a family secret. Sometimes it becomes so submerged a secret that nobody ever even talks about it. So these are the three things that really expose the fact that us is really an allegory about how African Americans passed as white because they looked white, just because they looked the way they did. And you see these hands stretch across America because this is really something that happened on a grand scale, especially after the Civil War. If you want to look further into this, I want to give you some examples of real people in history that this happened to. The first one that always comes to mind for me is the great Coast Guard Captain Michael Healy. You may not be familiar with him, but look him up online and read about him. Another one was a woman named Anita Hemming. She was the first woman to graduate from Vassar. And she was finally discovered and found out. So you can see how, and her family knew about it. They intentionally stayed away from her because they knew that she'd be exposed. And the third one is a little more contemporary, is a woman named Carol Channing, who was a great Broadway-like singer and actress. So this is what clarity, insight, and perspective has revealed today. And I want you to see this, that us is really the story in Red and Adelaide, especially in Adelaide, of how African Americans passed for white and lived their lives and had to keep these deep, dark secrets, lest they be discovered and lose all their privilege.